Welcome to the channel of science fiction. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more content. Enjoy listening. Chris always had a way with people. It wasn't just his looks, though admittedly the chiseled jawline, piercing green eyes and tousled brown hair didn't hurt. It was something deeper, a magnetism, a charm that seemed to bend the world around him. He could talk his way out of parking tickets, convince grumpy neighbors to lend him tools they swore they'd never share, and somehow always manage to get free dessert at restaurants. It wasn't arrogance. It was effortless. People just liked him. He grew up in a small town on Earth, the kind of place where everyone knew your business before you did. His parents ran a modest repair shop, fixing everything from ancient coffee machines to cutting-edge drones. Chris spent his childhood tinkering with machines alongside his father, learning the intricacies of gears and circuits. But while he was good with machines, he was better with people. His mother used to joke that if he ever got stranded on a desert island, he'd charm the coconuts into building him a raft. By his early 20s, Chris had tried his hand at everything: sales, teaching, even stand-up comedy. None of it stuck. He wasn't unhappy, far from it, but something inside him yearned for more. He wanted adventure, something bigger than himself. He wanted to see the stars. The opportunity came in the form of a recruitment notice from the United Earth Space Agency, UESA. They were looking for candidates for an experimental program, Project Horizon. The goal? To train humans for deep space exploration and first contact scenarios with alien civilizations. Chris didn't hesitate. He signed up the same day. Training was brutal. The physical regimen pushed him to his limits: zero-gravity endurance tests, survival drills on simulated alien terrains, and endless hours in the centrifuge to prepare for high-G maneuvers. But it was the psychological training that truly tested him. They subjected recruits to isolation chambers, simulated alien languages, and complex moral dilemmas designed to prepare them for encounters with extraterrestrial beings whose values might be incomprehensible. Chris thrived, while others struggled with the language simulations or panicked in isolation. He remained calm, curious even. His instructors noted his uncanny ability to adapt to new situations and communicate effectively under pressure. "He's got the X factor," one of them remarked during a review meeting. "If anyone's going to charm an alien ambassador into not vaporizing us, it's this guy." The other recruits weren't so sure about him at first. Some thought he was too cocky, others resented how easily things seemed to come to him. But over time, even the skeptics warmed up to Chris. He had a way of making people feel seen and valued, a rare gift in a program designed to weed out all but the most exceptional candidates. By the time he graduated from Project Horizon, Chris had become something of a legend among his peers. Stories circulated about how he'd convinced an AI instructor, programmed to be unyielding, to grant him an extension on an impossible assignment, or how he defused a heated argument between two recruits by turning it into a game of charades. But as much as he enjoyed the camaraderie and challenges of training, Chris couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the prelude to something greater. That something came in the form of the Dauntless, UESA's newest deep space exploration vessel. Sleek and bristling with cutting-edge technology, it was humanity's first true interstellar ship, capable of reaching distant star systems in mere months, thanks to its revolutionary Alcubierre drive. Chris was assigned as part of the Dauntless's inaugural crew, a mix of scientists, engineers, diplomats, and military personnel, chosen for their expertise and adaptability. His official role was cultural liaison, a title that sounded vague but essentially boiled down to be ready to talk our way out of trouble if we meet aliens. Before departure day arrived, Chris spent one last evening on Earth with his family and friends. They gathered at his parents' house for a barbecue under the stars, an ironic choice given where he was headed. As they laughed and shared stories around the fire pit, Chris felt a pang of bittersweetness. He knew this might be the last time he saw Earth, or them, for years. When it was time to leave, his mother hugged him tightly and whispered in his ear, "Remember who you are out there." His father clapped him on the shoulder and said simply, "Make us proud." Chris nodded, swallowing back emotion as he boarded the shuttle that would take him to the Dauntless. As Earth grew smaller behind him and the vastness of space stretched out ahead, Chris felt a thrill unlike anything he'd ever known. This was it, the adventure he'd always dreamed of. What he couldn't have known then was just how much that adventure would change not only his life, but the fate of humanity itself. For among those distant stars were civilizations beyond imagination, some curious about humanity's arrival, others hostile. And Chris's unique gift would soon be put to tests far greater than anything he had faced before. And so began the journey of Chris, the man who would become known across galaxies as the charmer of the stars. Chris had always been a natural conversationalist. Back on Earth, his charm and wit had been his most potent tools, but in space, they became his superpower. When the Dauntless reached its first alien contact point, a sprawling orbital station, inhabited by a coalition of alien species, the crew braced for the unknown. They expected hostility, confusion, or at best, a cold diplomatic exchange. What they didn't expect was Chris. The station was home to dozens of alien species, each more bizarre and fascinating than the last. There were the shimmering, translucent Quarathians, who communicated through bioluminescent pulses. The towering insectoid Krelkans, whose mandibles clicked out a language that sounded like a symphony of marbles. And the soft-spoken Yelfari, whose voices were so low they vibrated, through the bones rather than the ears. But among all these species, one thing became quickly apparent. The females of many races were often overlooked or outright ignored in their societies. It wasn't that alien males were cruel, though some certainly were. It was more that their cultures had evolved in ways that relegated female voices to the background. Whether it was due to biological differences or ancient traditions, female aliens often found themselves excluded from meaningful dialogue. Chris noticed this almost immediately. His first breakthrough came with a Quarathian named Lirith. She was a cultural historian assigned to assist the Dauntless crew in understanding the station's protocols. While most of the crew struggled to interpret her glowing patterns, Chris took a different approach. He didn't just try to decipher her language, he tried to connect. He asked her about her work, her interests, her life on the station. And first, Lirith seemed startled, unused to such direct attention, but soon her bioluminescent patterns began to glow in vibrant waves of what Chris guessed was joy. Word spread quickly among the station's inhabitants. The human male wasn't just tolerating their presence, he was interested in them. He listened when others dismissed them. He asked questions when others ignored them, and he did it all with that easygoing charm that seemed to transcend species. The Yelfari females were next. Their deep vibrations were difficult for most humans to understand without specialized equipment, but Chris found that if he leaned into their frequency, literally pressing his forehead against their resonating chambers, he could feel their words as much as hear them. It was an intimate form of communication by human standards, but for the Yelfari women, it was revolutionary. No male of their species had ever bothered to listen so closely. Then there were the Krelkan matriarchs. These towering insectoids were feared even among their own kind for their sharp intellect and sharper claws. Yet when Chris approached one of them, a matriarch named Zurkala, and complimented her on the intricate carvings etched into her exoskeleton, a form of personal storytelling among Krelkans, she let out a series of clicks that translators identified as laughter. It was the first time anyone on the Dauntless had heard a Krelkan laugh. Before long, Chris became something of a sensation on the station. Female aliens from all corners of the coalition sought him out, not just for his attention but for his perspective. He treated them as equals, as individuals with stories worth telling and ideas worth sharing. For many of them, it was a novel experience. But not everyone was pleased with Chris's growing popularity. Among some male aliens, particularly those from more patriarchal societies, his actions were seen as disruptive at best and subversive at worst. Rumors began circulating about the humans' agenda. Was he trying to undermine their cultures? Was he seducing their females? Some even accused him of espionage, though no evidence supported such claims. Chris remained unfazed by the backlash. "If treating people with respect is controversial," he told one crewmate with a shrug, "then I guess I'm guilty." Despite, or perhaps because of, the controversy surrounding him, Chris's influence continued to grow. Female aliens began organizing informal gatherings where they could share ideas and experiences without fear of judgment or dismissal. They called these gatherings circles, inspired by one of Chris's metaphors about how conversations should be like circles, inclusive and unbroken. The circles quickly evolved into something more significant than anyone anticipated. Female scientists collaborated across species lines on projects that had been stalled for decades due to bureaucratic gridlock or lack of support from male leadership. Artists from different worlds created stunning works that blended their unique cultural styles into something entirely new. Even political alliances began forming within these circles, alliances that would have been unthinkable just months earlier. Through it all, Chris remained at the center, not as a leader but as a catalyst. He didn't claim credit for what was happening, he simply kept doing what he'd always done, listening, encouraging, connecting. But while Chris's actions earned him admiration from many and suspicion from others, they also attracted attention from forces far beyond the station. Unbeknownst to him or his crew, powerful factions within the coalition were beginning to take notice of this human who seemed capable of bridging divides that had existed for millennia. Some saw him as an asset to be exploited, others saw him as a threat to be eliminated. And then there were those who saw something else entirely. Hope. For in Chris's ability to connect with others, not through technology or diplomacy, but through simple human empathy, they glimpsed a potential future where humanity might not just survive among the stars, but thrive. But that future would not come easily or without cost. As the Dauntless prepared to leave the station and continue its mission deeper into uncharted space, Chris couldn't shake the feeling that his journey was only just beginning, and that whatever lay ahead would test him in ways he could scarcely imagine. Little did he know how right he was. The circles had grown into an unstoppable force. Female aliens from across the station, and even from distant star systems, flocked to meet the human who had sparked a quiet revolution. Chris, ever humble, never saw himself as anything more than a curious traveler. But the aliens saw him differently. To them, he was a symbol of change, a living embodiment of what could happen when barriers were broken and voices long silenced were finally heard. But as the weeks turned into months, something unexpected began to happen. The connections Chris had forged with these alien women deepened, not just emotionally but physically. It started innocently enough, late-night conversations that stretched into the early hours, laughter shared over meals of alien cuisine, and moments of quiet vulnerability where cultural differences melted away, leaving only two beings trying to understand one another. For many of these alien women, Chris represented something they had never experienced before: genuine affection and respect. In their societies, relationships were often transactional or bound by rigid traditions. But with Chris, there were no expectations, no ulterior motives, just an open heart and an insatiable curiosity about who they were as individuals. The first pregnancy was a shock to everyone. Lirith, the Quarathian historian, who had been one of Chris's earliest friends on the station, approached him one morning glowing, literally glowing, with excitement. Her bioluminescent patterns, had shifted into hues that Quarathians associated with new life. At first, Chris thought it was some kind of cultural celebration until Lirith gently explained that she was carrying his child. "Wait. What?" Chris stammered, his face flushing red. "How is that even possible? We're not even the same species." Lirith's glow pulsed with amusement. "Life finds a way," she said in her soft, melodic voice, a phrase she had picked up from one of Chris's many Earth stories. Before Chris could fully process the news, more revelations followed. Zrkala, the imposing Krelkan matriarch, with whom he had shared countless philosophical debates and long walks through the station's arboretum, informed him that she too was expecting. The Krelkan reproductive process was vastly different from anything on Earth, requiring a genetic spark from a partner to activate dormant eggs. But somehow, Chris's genetic material had triggered it. Then came Yelfari twins from a quiet poet named Thalra, a clutch of hybrid eggs from an aquatic species called the Vrenai, and even a child from an enigmatic energy-based being known as Auralis, whose pregnancy manifested as a swirling nebula-like cloud within her core. By the time the seventh announcement came, a delicate avian-like alien named Shiara, who laid 3 shimmering eggs in her nest-like quarters, Chris was no longer surprised. Bewildered? Yes. Overwhelmed? Absolutely. But surprised? Not anymore. The crew of the Dauntless didn't know what to make of it all. Some were amused, others scandalized, but most were simply baffled by how one human could have such an impact on so many alien species. Dr. Elena Morales, the ship's chief xenobiologist, spent countless hours studying the phenomenon and concluded that human DNA possessed an unprecedented adaptability when combined with alien genomes. "It's like your genetic code is eager," she told Chris during one of their many consultations. "Most species have rigid reproductive barriers to prevent interbreeding with others. But humans? Your DNA seems to say, sure, let's give it a shot." Chris groaned and buried his face in his hands. "Great. I'm basically Space Casanova." But while Chris struggled to come to terms with his newfound role as an interstellar father-to-be, the news sent shockwaves through the coalition. For centuries, millennia even, most species had believed interbreeding between different races was impossible, or at least highly improbable, without advanced genetic engineering. Yet here was proof that humanity possessed something extraordinary, the ability to bridge not just cultural divides, but biological ones as well. For many female aliens, this revelation was nothing short of revolutionary. If humans could produce offspring with other species naturally, what else might they be capable of? Could humanity be the key to unlocking new forms of unity across the galaxy? To forging bonds that transcended not just borders but biology itself? Not everyone saw it that way. Among certain factions within the coalition, particularly among male-dominated societies, the news sparked outrage and fear. They accused humanity of meddling in affairs they didn't understand, of corrupting their traditions and destabilizing their carefully maintained hierarchies. Some even began whispering about the human contagion, framing Chris's actions as part of a larger conspiracy to undermine alien civilizations. Tensions reached a boiling point when a coalition council convened to discuss what they called the human problem. Representatives from dozens of species gathered in a vast chamber carved into the heart of the station, a place where decisions affecting entire star systems were made. Chris was summoned to testify, standing before the council, surrounded by towering insectoids, shimmering energy beings, and creatures whose forms defied description. Chris felt more out of place than he ever had in his life, but he refused to back down. "I didn't come here to cause trouble," he said firmly, his voice echoing through the chamber. "I came here because I wanted to learn, to understand you all and share what I could about humanity in return." He gestured toward Lirith and Zerkala, who sat among the audience alongside several other expectant mothers. What happened between me and these incredible women wasn't part of some plan or agenda. It just happened because we connected as individuals. He paused, scanning the room for any sign of understanding among his audience. Maybe that scares some of you, he continued. Maybe it challenges how you see yourselves or your place in the galaxy. But isn't that what exploration is? About pushing boundaries, discovering new possibilities? For a moment, there was silence. Then Lirith stood up and began glowing in vibrant colors that translated roughly to applause among her people. One by one, other female aliens joined her until half the chamber was filled with gestures of support, from clicks and hums to flashes of light and telepathic waves. The council ultimately decided against taking punitive action against Chris, or humanity at large, though not without heated debate, but tensions remained high. As the Dauntless prepared to leave the station and continue its mission deeper into uncharted space, Chris found himself reflecting on everything that had happened since he first set foot aboard the ship. He was no longer just an explorer or a cultural liaison. He was now something far more complicated. A father to children who represented not just him, but humanity's potential future among the stars. And while he didn't know what challenges lay ahead, or how he would possibly juggle interstellar diplomacy with parenthood, one thing was certain. This journey was far from over. Chris had become a legend. Across the galaxy, his name was whispered with awe, curiosity, and in some cases, envy. The human who had defied biology and cultural norms to father hybrid offspring with alien women was no longer just a curiosity. He was a phenomenon. What had started as a few heartfelt connections aboard the Coalition station had spiraled into something far larger than Chris could have ever imagined. The news of his hybrid children spread like wildfire. Coalition scientists published papers on the unprecedented adaptability of human DNA, sparking debates about humanity's place in the galactic ecosystem. Philosophers argued over the implications of this newfound genetic compatibility, while religious leaders across countless worlds either hailed Chris as a divine figure or condemned him as an abomination. Meanwhile, artists immortalized his story in paintings, holograms, and even interpretive dances that attempted to capture the essence of his interstellar connections. But it wasn't just academics and cultural figures who took notice. Alien women from every corner of the galaxy began flocking to wherever Chris was stationed, hoping for their chance to meet him. Some came out of scientific curiosity, others out of romantic interest, and still others because they saw in him the possibility of something greater, a bridge between their species and humanity. At first, Chris tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy. He continued his work as a cultural liaison aboard the Dauntless, mediating disputes between alien factions and fostering cooperation among Coalition members. But it quickly became clear that his life would never be normal again. The first wave of visitors arrived quietly, a handful of alien women who had heard rumors and wanted to see for themselves if the stories were true. Chris treated them with the same kindness and respect he showed everyone, listening to their stories and learning about their cultures. For many of these women, it was the first time anyone, let alone a male, had taken such an interest in their lives. But as more and more visitors arrived, things began to spiral out of control. The docking bays of the Dauntless were soon overwhelmed, with ships carrying hopeful suitors from across the stars. The ship's captain, Commander Elena Morales, tried to maintain order, but found herself woefully unprepared for the sheer scale of the phenomenon. "This is insane," she muttered one day as she watched yet another shuttle unload a group of alien women onto the station's promenade. "Chris, you've turned my ship into a galactic dating hub." Chris rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. "I didn't ask for this," he said. I don't know how to say no without offending them." "You're going to have to figure it out," Morales replied grimly. "Because if this keeps up, We're going to need an entire fleet just to handle the traffic." Despite Morales' frustrations, there was no denying that Chris's presence aboard the Dauntless had brought unprecedented attention and resources to humanity's fledgling interstellar program. Coalition leaders who had once dismissed humanity as a backwater species now saw them in a new light. If humans could form such profound connections with other species on both a personal and biological level, what else might they be capable of? Meanwhile, Chris's hybrid children began to make their mark on the galaxy. Each child was unique, a living testament to the blending of human and alien genetics. Lirith's daughter glowed with bioluminescent patterns that shifted in response to her emotions, while Zrkala's son inherited both his mother's towering stature and his father's disarming smile. Thalra's Yelfari twins communicated through deep vibrations that resonated across entire rooms, mesmerizing anyone who heard them. As these children grew and began interacting with others, they became symbols of hope for many, a glimpse into a future where species could coexist not just peacefully, but harmoniously. But not everyone welcomed this future. Among certain factions within the coalition, particularly those from more isolationist or patriarchal societies, Chris's growing influence was seen as a threat. They accused him of undermining traditional values and destabilizing their cultures by encouraging interspecies relationships. One particularly vocal critic was High Chancellor Vorthak of the Drakthar Dominion, a reptilian species known for its rigid social hierarchies. During a heated council meeting, Vorthak slammed his clawed hand on the table and declared, "This human is an affront to everything we stand for. If we allow this madness to continue, our traditions will be eroded beyond recognition." Chris remained calm in the face of such hostility. "With all due respect," he said evenly, "your traditions are your own to preserve or change as you see fit. I'm not here to tell anyone how to live. I'm just trying to build connections where I can." His words earned him applause from some council members, but only deepened Vorthak's animosity. As tensions mounted within the coalition, Chris found himself at the center of an increasingly polarized debate about humanity's role in the galaxy. Some saw him as a harbinger of unity, others saw him as a dangerous disruptor. Through it all, Chris tried to stay true to himself, to treat everyone he met with kindness and respect regardless of their opinions about him. But even he couldn't ignore the growing weight of his responsibilities, not just as a father, but as a symbol for something much larger than himself. One evening aboard the Dauntless, Chris sat alone in his quarters staring out at the stars. His thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. "Come in," he called. The door slid open to reveal Lirith standing there glowing softly in shades of blue and green, colors that Chris had learned represented concern among her people. "Are you all right?" she asked gently. Chris sighed and ran a hand through his hair. "I don't know," he admitted. "Sometimes I feel like I'm in over my head." Lirith stepped closer and placed a glowing hand on his shoulder. "You may not have chosen this path," she said softly, "but you're walking it with grace, and that matters." Her words gave Chris some measure of comfort, but deep down he knew that his journey was far from over. For while he had become famous for fathering hybrid children with alien women, and while those children had begun forging new paths for interspecies cooperation, the challenges ahead would test him in ways he could scarcely imagine. And somewhere out there among those countless stars were forces watching him closely, some with admiration, others with malice, but all waiting to see what this extraordinary human would do next. The galaxy had changed in ways no one could have predicted. What had begun as a single human's journey into the stars had evolved into a legend that spanned entire systems. Chris, once just a cultural liaison aboard the Dauntless, now ruled over a planet unlike any other, a world that stood as a beacon of unity, diversity, and strength. It was a place where the impossible had become reality. A thriving civilization built by the descendants of humanity and countless alien species. The planet, named Harmonia, was gifted to Chris by the Coalition after decades of his influence reshaping galactic politics. At first, it was a symbolic gesture, a neutral ground where species could come together to collaborate and coexist. But as Chris's hybrid children grew in number and prominence, Harmonia became something far greater, the home of an entirely new people. Chris's descendants, half-human, half-alien hybrids, were extraordinary in every sense of the word. Each child inherited traits from both their parents, creating beings who were stronger, smarter, and more adaptable than either species alone. Lirith's daughter, Lyra, could communicate across vast distances using her bioluminescent patterns, making her a natural leader among the hybrids. Zrkala's son, Krathos, combined his mother's Krelkan strength with his father's charisma, becoming a warrior and diplomat who commanded respect wherever he went. Thalra's Yelfari twins, Vaughn and Velra, used their resonant voices to calm disputes and inspire unity among even the most fractious factions. And these were just a few of Chris's many children. Over the years, his family had grown into the thousands as more alien women sought him out, not just for his genetic legacy, but for the kindness and love he offered so freely. Despite the sheer number of his descendants, Chris somehow managed to be present for each of them. He remembered their names, their birthdays, or equivalent milestones, and their unique quirks. He attended ceremonies on dozens of worlds to celebrate their achievements and offered guidance whenever they sought it. It wasn't just his biological children who looked up to him. Harmonia itself became a sanctuary for those who felt out of place in their own societies. Refugees from war-torn systems, exiles from rigid cultures, and dreamers seeking something greater, all found a home on Harmonia. Chris welcomed them all with open arms, treating them not as subjects but as family. His leadership style was unconventional, more paternal than regal, but it worked. The people of Harmonia didn't see him as a distant king ruling from an ivory tower. They saw him as their Chris, the man who listened, who cared, who believed in them even when they didn't believe in themselves. Under Chris's guidance, and with the help of his remarkable children, Harmonia flourished. Its cities were marvels of architecture that blended human ingenuity with alien aesthetics. Towering spires made of living crystal stood alongside sprawling gardens that glowed with bioluminescent flora. The planet's economy thrived on trade and innovation, with Harmonian scientists leading breakthroughs in fields ranging from medicine to energy production. But Harmonia's true strength lay in its people. The hybrids possessed abilities that made them invaluable across the galaxy. Telepathic communication inherited from the Yelfari, unparalleled physical endurance from the Krelkans, even the ability to manipulate energy fields thanks to Auralis's descendants. These traits made them natural leaders in diplomacy, exploration, and defense, and they were fiercely loyal to their father. Chris never demanded loyalty, it wasn't in his nature, but his children adored him nonetheless. They saw how tirelessly he worked to ensure their happiness and prosperity, and how deeply he cared for each of them, despite his responsibilities. For them, he wasn't just a king, or even just a father. He was theirs. The one who had brought them into existence, not out of duty or ambition, but out of love. As Harmonia rose to prominence on the galactic stage, it inevitably attracted enemies. There were still those who resented humanity's growing influence or feared what the hybrids represented. Rogue factions launched attacks on Harmonian trade routes. Shadowy conspiracies plotted to undermine Chris's rule. But they underestimated two things: Chris himself and the loyalty of his descendants. When pirates attempted to blockade Harmonia's orbital stations, Kratos led a fleet of hybrid-piloted ships to drive them off with precision strikes that left no room for retaliation. When saboteurs tried to infiltrate Harmonian research facilities, Lyra used her bioluminescent communication network to coordinate countermeasures before they could cause any damage. And when an assassin attempted to take Chris's life during a diplomatic summit, Vaughn and Velra neutralized the threat with such grace that most attendees didn't even realize what had happened until it was over. Through it all, Chris remained steadfast, not as a warrior or tactician, but as the heart of Harmonia. He continued to meet with alien leaders across the galaxy, advocating for unity and understanding even in the face of hostility. His message was simple but powerful. We are stronger together than we could ever be apart. As decades passed, Chris watched his children grow into leaders in their own right. Some stayed on Harmonia to help govern its ever-expanding population. Others ventured into the galaxy to forge new alliances and explore uncharted territories. Wherever they went, they carried their father's legacy with them, a legacy of compassion, courage, and connection. By the time Chris reached old age, a rarity among humans but extended thanks to advanced medical technology, Harmonia had become more than just a planet. It was an idea. A living testament to what could happen when barriers were broken down and differences were celebrated rather than feared. On his 100th birthday, or its equivalent in galactic standard years, billions gathered on Harmonia and across countless worlds to celebrate his life. His children, now numbering in the tens of thousands, stood by his side as he addressed the galaxy one last time. "I never set out to change anything," he said with a smile that still carried all the warmth and charm that had made him famous so many years ago. "I just wanted to understand, to connect." He looked out at the crowd before him. Hybrids, standing shoulder to shoulder with humans and aliens alike. Families composed of species that once couldn't have imagined coexisting. Leaders who had once been enemies, now working together toward common goals. "This," he said softly but firmly, "is what we're capable of when we choose love over fear." As cheers erupted across Harmonia and echoed through every corner of the galaxy, Chris felt an overwhelming sense of peace. He had come so far from that small town on Earth, where he'd once dreamed of adventure among the stars. And now, he wasn't just part of history, he was history, the man who had turned dreams into reality and inspired an entire galaxy along the way. And so ended the story of Chris, the charmer of stars, whose legacy would shine brightly for millennia to come.